Hello and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Larry Pearson. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Impetus Technologies, and I will be your host for today's webinar on the topic of automate and optimize data warehouse migration to Snowflake. For those of you who may not be familiar with Impetus, we specialize in the area of data warehouse modernization, spend the majority of our time there today, and really, this mission statement that you see on the screen in front of you right now is what we most commonly referred to as single source of truth. It's a big issue for large corporations today, and the topic that we're addressing, including migration to Snowflake, is one way to build a modern data architecture to help you achieve a single source of truth for your business. Let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. We'll talk first off about cloud migration strategy. As I mentioned, we are spending a significant amount of our time in data warehouse modernization, and in today's marketplace, that means we're heavily involved with cloud strategy and cloud migration. We'll talk about how we're helping our clients achieve their cloud migration objectives, specifically in this case using the Snowflake platform, where we'll be talking about automated workload transformation to Snowflake. We'll be demonstrating that solution, and then as I say, we will close at the end with a live Q&A from our panelists. You'll shortly see a poll showing up there on your screen. The first poll question is, which of the migration objectives seem to be most challenging while migrating to Snowflake? And the options here are effort, cost, and time frame, validation and certification, training, achieving performance SLAs, or other. And again, please do respond to the poll here, and we will share the results of that with you. It'll be open on your screen here for 15 minutes. You may respond to that really at any time. And I'd remind you again to send your questions in as well. Let me introduce my colleagues who are delivering the material here today. The first is Sanjeev Sharma. Sanjeev is a principal architect for Impetus. Prior to his current role, he actually was chief enterprise architect in the Impetus Innovation Lab that conceived, architected, and built the solution that we're talking about today. In his role now as principal architect, he works directly with some of our most complex cloud migrations, and he'll be covering a number of the topics that I just talked about on that agenda. With him also is Barry Tuthill. Barry is Vice President of Field Operations in North America for Impetus and is directly involved with our prospects and clients building strategies, doing project assessments, building out return on investment analysis, and then working with our delivery teams to deliver on those goals and objectives. So I'd like right now to turn things over to Barry. Barry, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Larry, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. As Larry had mentioned, I lead field operations here at Impetus, and one of the nice things about my job is I get to talk to a lot of customers about their data strategy. And one thing is very clear that we've seen over the past 12 months is certainly migration to the cloud is a hot topic, but more specifically Snowflake. So lots of customers are interested in leveraging Snowflake in the cloud. So we're going to talk about how the Impetus solutions can help customers get there better, faster, and cheaper. But when we talk about cloud migration strategy, there are some core kind of business issues as well as technical issues we kind of talk to customers about. On the business side, I think first and foremost, the consideration is business as usual. So existing BI operations need to continue to run. They cannot stop despite, looking into changes around architecture in the cloud and migrating data platforms. The existing systems need to continue to run. Next, we find that enterprises are looking at their existing investments and really thinking about how do they leverage those investments, because there's 10 to 20 years of effort and, in many cases, tens of millions of dollars put into these legacy systems. So it's really not feasible in many cases to rebuild everything from scratch, and nor is it really that logical. So, oftentimes we talk to customers about, who are thinking about rebuilding, we talk about, are you really, are the data changes that your end user needs really changing? Are the reports really changing that you need? And most of the time that answer is no. Then risk management. So migration can be a very risky proposition for a lot of enterprises because it involves a lot of different people, process, and technologies. So in large legacy environments, these migrations can be, very quickly become error-prone and complex when done manually, or leveraging point solutions that don't address the full migration spectrum. From a cost and scale perspective, enterprises need to understand the capacity that's needed in their cloud environment to manage and understand costs. The promise of the immediate elasticity of the cloud is very, very enticing for a lot of enterprises, but it doesn't mean the CFO's, going to write a blank check to move to the cloud. So those costs need to be clearly understood. And from a scale perspective, believe it or not, we talk to customers daily that don't have a clear view into their legacy data warehouse environment. So it's critical to do an inventory of those legacy workloads, associated dependencies, and really understand the scale of the migration. On the people and process side, so stakeholders need to be enrolled in the new tech stack. Many of your end users and IT teams have allegiances to these legacy technologies, and in many cases for very good reasons, because they've been around for a while and been providing significant value over time. But what's critical is that there's no disruption to the end users from a people and process perspective as you look at migration. And then finally, interoperability. I think it's pretty clear that from an enterprise view, vendor lock-in should be avoided. So enterprises should be looking at solutions that have the flexibility to move across the different cloud providers. On the technical side, there are also a lot of different considerations we talk to customers about. Obviously, architecture choices that the enterprise makes will ultimately impact their migration strategy. So we know that enterprises make their architecture decisions for a variety of different reasons based on their business objectives, and there's no kind of one size fits all cloud architecture strategy. But for the most part, we see these decisions being made based on as I mentioned, this desire for interoperability across cloud providers, acceptance of open source options like Spark, performance requirements, the data volumes that need to be processed, the complexity of the queries, cost tolerance, and a slew of other factors that go into architecture. On the performance side, obviously, as we move to the cloud, performance is a huge consideration because we need to make sure that the enterprise is meeting end user SLAs. I think one of the nice things about Snowflake is that ability to handle very stringent performance requirements. So, both from an architectural choice perspective and the performance needs of the enterprise really drives this, what we call a migration blueprint. To build the blueprint first, though, the enterprise really needs to understand and assess what is their current state. So they need to understand the different queries, the different entities and usage patterns within their platform. They need to understand the interdependencies between ETL and the data warehouse processes, the complexity and capacity requirements of workloads, poor performing or unused workloads. So this, blueprint is absolutely critical. And it also helps drive, the next point, which is around automation. So where can automation come into play. And, I really think, when talking to customers, we need to think beyond just purely code translation. Enterprises need to be thinking about how they handle migration from a holistic perspective, everything from assessment to this blueprint to historical and incremental data migration to code transformation and optimization to validation and execution, the full, migration spectrum. Finally, parallel run. So a lot of enterprises, for risk management and compliance reasons, require some time period that both platforms need to be running before they can decommission that legacy platform. And this adds additional costs and overhead and needs to be planned up front. So, I think in general, when talking to customers, we see kind of 5 kind of major concerns that pop up pretty consistently. One is, how do we leverage our existing investments? How do we reuse what we've already built, these existing workloads, but also how can we take that and optimize it for, our cloud environment? How do we resolve the, migration as is versus total reengineering dilemma? And, what we, talk to customers a lot about, and I think, we've seen it generally accepted, is that, we've created this 60-20-20 rule. And this rule basically, says that, if you look at the enterprise's, data platform environment, 60% of that legacy environment can be migrated as is through, intelligent schema transformation, automation. The other 20% can be migrated in a similar manner, but might also require some sort of additional optimization or performance tuning needs on that on the target solution. And then, that kind of last 20% really falls into that, re-architect category, whether it's something that wasn't built the right way in the legacy environment, but only 20% really need to be considered from a total reengineering perspective. I think one of the nice things that we have seen with Snowflake within our customers is that middle 20%, that kind of optimization and performance tuning category is much less in Snowflake just due to some of the inherent performance capabilities with that platform. The next, kind of core concern or question is, what is the extent of automation possible? There should be a way to cover automation considering all of the different migration steps. And I mentioned, this before, and I'll reiterate it again, not just pure code translation, but being able to look at it from an assessment and blueprinting perspective, being able to do that historical and incremental data migration to the transformation, to the validation and execution. And all of that should be automated. And that's one of the things that I think is very unique to Impetus and our workload transformation solution that Sanjay will be talking about and I'll be demonstrating to you in a little while. Then, the next core concern is around the risk and uncertainty. Manual migration can be very risky and error prone. Also taking a pure code translation approach can be risky because it's missing kind of other key, migration steps. So to reduce that risk and uncertainty, really we need to look at a holistic approach. And then finally, performance and costs. So, we've already talked about performance and meeting end user SLAs as a given. But on the cost side, we find that enterprises really underestimate what it takes to migrate. So this really needs to be planned up front and built into the business case model. A lot of times, we've seen enterprises try to take shortcuts and to just really have a disastrous impact on the migration project in the long run. So moving forward, the typical migration checklist or things that we talk about to customers that are critically important that you need to plan for. One is reuse. So embrace what you already have. use what you've had. You'd be surprised how much you can leverage from your legacy environment as you migrate. Number two, automate. Automate as much as you can to get faster time to value, but it also mitigates risks, it minimizes errors, increases the productivity, and ensures quality. Optimize. So use migration as a time to optimize for the cloud, but don't stop there. Continue to optimize to continue to take those performance SLAs to the next level. And finally, certify. So thoroughly validate the data, the queries during the migration process in an iterative and agile manner before you put it into production. Don't do validation as an afterthought. Make sure it's part of your process right from the beginning. So with that, I am going to pass this off to Sanjay Sharma, and he's going to dig into some more of the details around the Impetus Workload Transformation Solution. Take it away, Sanjay.
Thanks, Barry. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So now we're talking about how Impetus Workload Transformation Solution can take care of some of the concerns and the checklist that Barry was pointing out. So again, from an end-to-end automated migration perspective, we will be covering the entire life cycle, right from starting from the assessment piece. I'll go into each of these sections in more details. But understanding what needs to be migrated, where it needs to be migrated is really important. Of course, we're talking about migration, so we do have to take care of schema migration. We're talking about data migration. Data migration itself is a bit complex. You have to take care of one-time migrations, and then, of course, incremental migrations. And again, incremental migrations can be a real challenge, given that the system of records might still be on-prem, and there has to be pipeline setup, reconciliation processes, and DevOps process setup to ensure that we have all the incremental pipelines available running in the same way as in the traditional data warehouse environment. Of course, we'll excel at the automation for the workload logic conversion, where we'll convert all existing code base to SnowSQL. Now, we're talking about things like Teradata BTIC. We're talking about Netezza or Oracle Stored Procedures or SQL scripts. We're talking about SQL Server T-SQL. We're talking about Greenplum, Vertica, and so on and so forth for any other data warehouse that you might have. And converting those to Snowflake compliant scripts, whether it is SnowSQL, whether it is Snow JavaScript procedures, which were recently added, or have Python or Spark wrappers available around the converted code, especially for very complicated procedure stuff or things which require system calls and other things. For example, Teradata BTIC having activity counts or error codes and other things, or ETL logic like Informatica or Ab initio or data stage, which can also be potentially converted and migrated to a cloud-like environment using a combination of EMR Spark or Google Cloud Proc, Data Proc, or Azure Synapse or Azure HD Insights. This is also an opportunity for us to automate some of the DevOps processes. Again, the data warehouse, traditional data warehouse world sometimes does lack those governance and agile processes. So the automation that we bring to the table can also help us identify and set up continuous integration and delivery process. We can, of course, utilize the capabilities available in the native cloud, such as code build and others. And of course, we can also rely on integrating the DevOps capabilities available as a part of cloud native capabilities into the solution as well. Of course, as Barry was mentioning, the last piece would be validation and certification, ensuring that whatever we have converted and moved to the cloud is working in the same exact way as it was in the traditional environment, and business as usual remains same and the most critical thing. So we'll talk about how the solution helps in automating some of these. We started a 4-step process here, which we kind of mastered over the last 7-8 years while we have been migrating a lot of applications to the cloud. Now, of course, Snowflake does make it easier for us because Snowflake, as such itself, is providing a lot of capabilities around multi-cloud readiness or being performant as far as taking workloads is concerned. But again, the process will tell us some of the gotchas that we have seen in our some large Snowflake implementations and share some of the experiences from there. So the 4-step process that we will take for any migration process is starting with assessment, transform, validate, and execute. I'll go into each of these lifecycle steps in detail. So the assessment piece is one of the most critical pieces where we can assess and profile the existing workloads and be able to identify what workloads should be moved as a part of a staggered or an agile plan. We don't really recommend a big bang ever. So this workload assessment allows us to understand what pieces can be moved in first to Snowflake and then take on the other important business applications on the cloud as well. Another thing that we can identify is create dependency graphs between the various end-to-end use cases. So, for example, I can identify what system of records are being used for a specific kind of use case or application and work it through to the end consumption tool or usage, which allows me to clearly figure out if I move, let's say, one schema or a set of tables or one use case or one specific user, how does it relate and impact the other users or application or use case or the consumption itself. So grouping of workloads is really important. Now, other critical thing that assessment helps us to figure out is around performance. Again, I think Snowflake is really good that it offers autonomous performance management. But again, coming from our experiences, things like clustering keys up in the assessment phase itself does help us reduce the overall time and effort to do it later. So the assessment will figure out the patterns of various entities being used in a analytical process, and then be able to recommend the clustering keys for the same. So once we have identified what workloads should be moved in a phased manner, we can now start transforming those. The transformation automation varies anywhere from 90% and above, where we can convert the existing code base to SnowSQL. Of course, we will have to migrate the data beforehand. We will have to migrate the stored procedures, UDFs, take care of data types. Now, again, Teradata and some of the data warehouses are really very lenient in terms of case sensitiveness or L trims or R trims, whereas Snowflake, although it offers all capabilities, is somewhat lacking due to the enhancements or enhancements or extensions in the existing traditional data warehouse which have gone beyond SQL. So we will take care of converting and taking care of those UDFs which are not present in Snowflake. And again, they might actually not be in SQL 92 compliant. Now, one important aspect of the tool is to create patterns or extend patterns for the architectural guidelines of a specific enterprise. So not only do we have to take care of architecture in the cloud, security and governance in the cloud, but also ensuring that the best guidelines are being used. So some of the enterprise architecture team do lay out processes and best practices around how the data should be stored, or what would be the data types that are required on a Snowflake environment. It might govern how the ingestion patterns would look like, whether you will be using Snowpipe, whether you'll be using some ETL tool, what workflow manager or scheduler will be using in the cloud, whether you'll be using the cloud native DevOps or monitoring capabilities, or whether you'll be realizing and using something that is already being used in enterprise. So there's a lot of permutation and combinations as far as the end-to-end environment is concerned, the production environment is concerned. So the tool has the capability to learn those patterns and then be able to apply those as a part of transformation. The tool does offer some nice features as well, such as query editing, where we can quickly on the screen do a lot of editing for the converted code, and gives us a fine-grained control on what we want to see as a part of the converted code. Now, once the applications have been converted, they are running in the cloud, we have the ingestion pipeline set up, we have the consumption tools and analytical tools set up. The next most important aspect of a migration project is validation. So again, validation is a time-taking process, but here again, the automation tool helps us reduce the time considerably by auto-generating the validation and the reconciliation scripts. We could actually include reconciliation framework as a part of the code conversion process itself. But the end goal is that once we have migrated everything, we are also giving reports that 100% code is getting validated. We can provide a cell-to-cell matching for data as well as for query validation. And of course, there will be some discrepancies, especially with respect to, let's say, amount fields. You might be truncating to 6 or 7 or 9 digits or 2-3 digits in your traditional data warehouse, where Snowflake has other capabilities. So if there are mismatches, we will certainly be able to explain why and what is happening, and of course find pathways to ensure that we are able to take care of model risk management scenarios. As I said, we will be taking care of an end-to-end execution environment with the cloud-ready orchestration execution engine, having an integrated DevOps process. So continuous integration, continuous development process can easily be added to the overall process. And again, this might be new concepts not available in the traditional data warehouse, but are certainly a value add that somebody can get in as an extra hook while this migration project is happening. We can also help with the setting up the decommissioning methodology, including DR, backup, and other things, which actually are a bit more easier in the cloud, given that cloud is built for 24/7 operations and has a lot of redundancies and other things built from ground up. I did talk about multi-cloud readiness. So again, I think we are riding on Snowflake's capability to be ready for almost all clouds, whether it is Google Cloud or Azure Cloud or AWS Cloud. But what we bring to the table is ability to integrate and automate some of the security and governance, where, again, as I said earlier, we can use the cloud native security and governance tools and policies and processes, or use the enterprise governed or aligned security and governance policies. I'll summarize all of this together in this nice picture here. We're talking about the enterprise data warehouse on the left-hand side. So you can see Oracle, Teradata, Informatica, Netezza, SQL Server. There are others which are not listed here, but ETL tools can also be taken care of, Ab Initio, Informatica, Data Stage, ODI, and so on and so forth. We'll start with the assessment phase, where we'll look at the query logs. Traditionally, these are query logs, historical query logs. For example, for Teradata, it will be the DBC, PDCR query logs. For Oracle, it would be, again, the historical query logs and so on. And we'll also assess the code, which is the workload. So it, again, might be Teradata BT, it might be Oracle short procedures, it might be Oracle SQL code, it might be Informatica, Power Center XML, and so forth. And then we start transforming those. So the ingestion and ETL starts happening as a part of either Snowflake or similar tool sets that are again aligned with the architecture team. While the SQL, the short procedures get converted to SnowSQL or Snow JavaScript procedures or Spark or Python wrappers, while the scheduling, workflow, the DevOps and other processes are converted into a cloud native or enterprise grade ingestion or scheduler or a workflow setup. As far as validation is concerned, we'll ensure that the data has been validated correctly, and all the SQL that is getting converted, all the workloads that are getting converted are also getting converted correctly. So in the end, we will end up with a system which is at par as far as functional capability is concerned. We'll also ensure that all performance SLAs are being met. But more importantly, now we have the capability to use the cloud additional capability, such as Snowflake's auto scaling capability, scale up and down, where you can literally take care of a lot of budget control. So you don't really have to run your traditional system 24/7 as you would do today, and use Snowflake's capability to reduce your operational costs considerably. And of course, the ability to combine with other sources in the cloud and ability to scale up and down really allows enterprises to think beyond the current capabilities in data warehouse and go to newer opportunities like machine learning or data science and become more business-centric. I'll hand it over now back to Barry again for a demo of some of the things that we discussed and shared with you. Barry, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. Just waiting to get control here. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. So you should be seeing, my web browser, which is, essentially showing you the workload transformation tool. So workload transformation is accessible via the web browser. And as I logged into the tool, the first screen that it brings me to is basically my dashboard. And this just gives me a sense of what I have going on in my world as a user of this tool, the different assessments I have running, the different pipelines I have executed, and things of that nature. As we talked about before, the first step of a migration process and plan is assessment. So as you noticed, I went to the menu on the left-hand corner, went into the assessment part, and I have already built a number of assessments in the tool already. To build an assessment, as Sanjay had mentioned, we just need access to execution logs of the data warehouse environment. In this case, I've got execution logs from a Teradata environment, and I'm logging into going into the assessment of this Teradata environment. What it gives me as I create this assessment is a number of details around what's happening in my Teradata environment. And the first thing I'd like to show you here is the query section. So based on the time frame of the execution logs that I looked at, I had about 15,500 queries running during that time. But more importantly, there's only about 5,500 unique queries. And this is important because it identifies redundancy in the data warehouse environment. When we look at migration, we will only want to migrate unique queries as we, execute a migration pipeline. So that's important. The next thing I want to share with you here is the query type. So, our system basically buckets the different queries into the different types. But more importantly, as I drilled into this dashboard, what it provides me over on the right-hand side is a complexity score. So this is an internal algorithm to our tool that helps us understand what is the complexity of each individual query. And this is really important for us in that kind of blueprinting stage, because this gives us visibility into that 60-20-20 rule that I had mentioned before, if you remember that. So you kind of the more simpler queries in the environment would fall into that kind of migrate as is category, where it can be very easily run through our transformation engine, and we can automate the creation of the Snowflake specific schema on the other end. Now, when you get into some of the more complex type queries, from a complexity score, you can have anywhere from a 1 and a 10. So if we get to like 8, 9, or 10, we would want to look at those queries a little bit closer to understand, do they have a place in the target environment? Was it architected the right way in the Teradata environment to determine whether or not we want to, run it through our engine and do some performance and tuning and optimizations on the other end, or whether or not we decide that, hey, this really doesn't make sense to migrate, as is. We should really rebuild this in the Snowflake environment. So that's what the complexity score does. It's very, very important in that blueprinting exercise that we go through. Similarly, we look at query constructs and entities. So if I dig into the query constructs, I also have, complexity scores related to that. And when I get into the entities, this is important because it allows us to look at the different tables that are being accessed, the data sources, but more importantly, the frequency of use. So this allows us to determine whether or not certain queries are actually being leveraged, and does it even make sense to migrate over if they're not being leveraged. Going into a little deeper to the assessment piece, if I go down here, we get into the most resource-consuming applications. So if I drill into this, I can look at all of the different applications that are being run in my Teradata environment, but also see the execution CPU, and I/O time that those applications are taking. So this will help us kind of prioritize and phase out a migration plan, kind of help us identify maybe some low-hanging fruit here that will reduce capacity in my Teradata environment, but also where it will be easily migrated over to Snowflake. But it also gives us visibility and helps us plan for what type of capacity might be needed in the cloud environment based on how much it's taking in the legacy world. So that's the application resource view. And we can also look at this from a user perspective as well, but I'm not going to drill into that because it's pretty similar. You just see the different types of users and how much capacity that they're taking. But what I want to showcase now is the recommendation section here that you see at the top. So out of those 5,500 or so unique queries that we have, just about 5,000 of those were recommended to be moved to Snowflake. So this means that we've got a very high degree of confidence that we're going to run these through our engine and get very high levels of automation, where these queries will be converted, transformed, and ready to be run against the Snowflake environment. So this, I think, there's more to the assessment piece that we could dig into, but for time purposes, I'm going to stop here and move to the other sections. And one of the nice things about workload transformation and what customers always kind of appreciate with how we built this is we don't just stop at assessment. Everything that we have here is actionable. So once I decide what I want to migrate, it's as simple as creating a migration pipeline to do that. Now, I went to the pipeline section, and I've got a number of pipelines already pre-built out. let's look at this Teradata to Snowflake demo. As you can see, this the stages of this pipeline, there are 5 stages. We've got a migration stage first, then a data validation stage, translation, execution, and then another data validation stage. If I look visually at what this pipeline looks like, you can see the different operations, that we've kind of dragged and dropped to this environment. And let me go into the edit design so you can kind of appreciate what it takes to build one of these pipelines. Looks like I'm having a little trouble with that view. But, simply what happens is these operations are available in the edit view, and we can simply drag and drop these different operations to our canvas. Behind the scenes of each one of these operations, there are a number of configuration options. For example, validation. You can pick your validation routines you want to run or functions you want to use. In the migration step is where we set up the source and target data sources and things of that nature. But as you can see, this pipeline was pre-built and already run. I'd like to quickly walk you through each one of these stages. So the first stage is migration, and we're looking at the output of this migration stage. We've moved a total of 13 tables. So the data, scheme, and views have been migrated over to Snowflake. And you can see the table names and source and target row data details here as well. So we see that this migration step has been successfully completed. Next is a data validation step. In data validation, we're applying different functions to both the source and target tables as we're going through this process. So here, if I dig into this part, you can see here that we've run some validation routines, specifically not null, average, max, min, and count all. And you can see, with the source and target tables that these values match, right? So we know we're getting this data is being validated as we move through this migration process. The next step, and what I always describe, with Impetus is I always describe this as our secret sauce here. This is the translation and transformation engine, right, where we have the ability to take this Teradata code and automatically convert it to Snowflake code, right? So we've got a total of 86 queries. We've automatically converted 100% of these. And typically what you would see in the real world, we'll see anywhere between 90 to 100% automated conversion. And here you'll see the different, the original query and the transformed query. And, each one of these, has been transformed to support, the Snowflake specific function. So here's the Teradata query right here, and you can see the difference in the query to be able to be supported in Snowflake. So that's all done in an automated way, but as Sanjay had mentioned before, we do have an editing capability. So if you're a developer and you don't like what you see there, you can always make changes to the code to update it how you want it to look. So there are some controls there. And then, execution, once we're done with the conversion, we can run it automatically against the Snowflake environment. As you can see, we've done this. It's been successful. And then even after the execution, we've got another data validation step to make sure that the data has been moved over the way we would expect it, right? So that's really kind of the end-to-end workflow that we do, and kind of aligns with the methodology that Sanjay talked about, which is assess, transform, validate, and execute. One quick thing that I wanted to show as well is just these are kind of I call them kind of simple queries, if you will, that were shown from a transformation perspective, but we also do the really complex things. So when you think of like a BTEC script, for example, it's got very complex queries, very complex workflows embedded in them. So our engine has the ability to do all the transformation of those as well. And here's an example of a Teradata BTEC script that has been automatically converted to Python code. And you can see that here. I handle field operations. I'm not a coder, so I'm not going to go through the details of the code. If there's interest in doing that, we would love the opportunity to set up a one-on-one session with anybody interested, and we can go into more of the details of the transformation. But from a demonstration perspective, I think that's really all we have time for. Just to recap, I kind of walked you through the assessment phase, right? I walked you through the transformation phase. I walked you through validation and finally execution. And all of these pieces together, again, to reiterate, are key components of a holistic migration strategy, right? It's much different than manual conversion, and it's much different than just a pure code translation process. So, with that, the value that our customers typically see with working with Impetus and leveraging our tooling is accelerated time to value. So we'll make this migration much faster. We've got a lot of pre-built optimizations and tuning built into the engine, so we'll help meet those performance SLAs. We'll reduce the risk and uncertainty through validation and automation. We'll actually, from a delivery perspective, really simplify this for our customers because we will do the end-to-end migration for our customers. So, we'll move everything over and make sure it's production ready. We'll significantly reduce the time it takes, the cost it takes, and the effort it takes by as much as 80%. And at the end of the day, help you as customers of trying to move more over to Snowflake, help you maximize your ROI into Snowflake. So with that, I am going to pass it back over to Larry Pearson. Again, thank you very much for your time.
Barry and Sanjay, thank you for the very comprehensive view of the process and the tool that we wanted to share with our audience today. If our operations team could close the polling now, I'd be happy to share the results of that polling with our audience. I would also remind you that this is a good time to finalize any questions that you may have, because just following this poll, we will open up the webinar to the Q&A portion. So you should see the results of the poll here on your screen momentarily. My ops team is telling me it'll be here a couple more minutes. There we go. So now you can see the results of that here. Effort, time, and time frame. Not surprisingly, almost 70% of you said that is your chief objective. And hopefully you can see ways that the tool you saw today can help improve and reduce the ROI, reduce the time frame and the effort and so forth. Secondly is a broad category of other. 4% were concerned about training. So thank you for participating in our poll. We will move now to the Q&A portion. And let me just check in with our ops team and see what we have by way of questions that have come in. The first question here is, how does your solution help avoid cloud vendor lock-in? Who would like to take that one?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think, and Sanjay, jump in and provide your feedback as well. I think, certainly there's a number of ways that we avoid lock-in. One is, it really depends from an architectural perspective what, an enterprise might want to do. And kind of where Snowflake fits into the picture. We see architecture patterns where, enterprises want to do a lot of the heavy lifting, the ETL and data preparation type work in Spark. right? So you can, so you can use native Spark code, Google run it on Dataproc or, on S3 in AWS or, Databricks in Azure. And it's basically your Spark code that is interoperable across these different cloud providers. So that's one way. And then, Snowflake is inherently interoperable across the different providers. So once you've moved to Snowflake, you have the flexibility to, if you've migrated everything from an ETL to consumption perspective over to Snowflake, you can then shift that environment to any of those cloud providers as well. Sanjay, anything you want to add there?
No, I think you covered that, Barry.
Okay, great. The next question then that we have says, does the solution support migrations for other than Teradata and Oracle?
Of course, yes. We support. We support Greenplum, Vertica, Oracle, and all of the major kind of. I always call them the common cast of characters from a legacy data warehouse perspective. Netezza, all of those guys are fully supported.
Okay, great. The next question that we have says, what are the benefits going from conventional star schema data warehouse and multi-dim or tabular semantic model over to Snowflake or similar big data warehouse? Sanjay, maybe you want to take that.
Yes. Larry, so I think this is actually a good question and kind of a confusion with respect to Snowflake. So Snowflake as a data warehouse in the cloud does not really constrain ourselves to having a Snowflake schema or to a conventional star schema or a multi-dimensional or tabular semantic model. So Snowflake is pretty flexible and offers any kind of data warehouse model. Of course, there are advantages and disadvantages of going from a star schema to Snowflake and others, but I think, again, as I said, Snowflake is not constrained to a Snowflake. You can actually use the best of what you have today and reuse some of it in the best possible way in the cloud.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sanjay. The next question says, does the data need to be moved to Snowflake to take advantage of it? Can we take advantage of the strong analytical capabilities using the existing source schema? And Sanjay, maybe you want to take that one.
Yes. So again, I think interesting question. So I think the way the Snowflake really performs well and is able to provide that on-demand capability on the cloud where you can control your cost for the work that you use or the consumption that you use, it is important that you have the data available as a part of Snowflake. So yeah, I think if you want to utilize the best capabilities of Snowflake, whether with autonomous performance and the control on cost and budget, then we need to move to the data to Snowflake.
Excellent, Sanjay. Here's one more for you. It says, what is the underlying technology specifically for ongoing data load from source systems to Snowflake?
So, again, one of very important questions. So, Snowflake actually comes with a lot of capabilities like Snowpipe. So I think as a part of the Impetus Workload Solution, you can actually take your mload or fastload or SQL loader, other kind of scripts, convert it into Snowpipe. We could also take existing ETL tools that might be being used for injection, such as Informatica or Administrative Data Stage, and others, to also convert into Snowpipe-like environment. But we do have customers saying that they do want to reuse their existing tool set. So today, tools like Informatica and Talent and others are also adding support for Snowflake natively. So as far as underlying technology is concerned, Snowflake is pretty flexible, and that's where our automation tool helps us identify what will work best for your environment, given that Such ingestions should have reconciliation information. It should have secure data transfer and other things that might be needed. So yeah, in the end, the underlying technology is pretty flexible. We can use the right one that you are aligned with, or we can use something that we can recommend and works the best for keeping your cost and costs lower and covering all governance and security aspects.
Excellent. Thank you, Sanjay. We do have other questions here. They will be answered and sent out to everyone using email. You'll see on the right-hand portion of your screen right now a couple of things, and the first is a second poll. And that second poll says, would you be interested in a deep dive of the product as shown in the webinar? And if you respond there, we'll be sure to follow up with you and schedule a one-on-one deep dive of the product. And obviously that gives you and us the opportunity to tailor that more to your specific environment and some of the concerns that you may have. Secondly, from a user experience point of view, would ask you to be sure to respond to this second poll question, which says, please rate your webinar experience from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. And there is an opportunity here to type any feedback or comment that you may have about the material, the content, the delivery, or the user experience today. And again, we read and value every one of those. Lastly, if you want more information beyond, maybe you're not ready for a deep dive, but you do have other questions and you'd like to have us get in contact with you, there's also a lot of information on our website at www.impetus.com, or you can reach us at inquiry@impetus.com. So I thank you again today. Take a few minutes before you sign off to rate our webinar, respond to this second poll question, whether you want a deep dive of the product or not. And other than that, I thank you for your time and have a great remainder of your day.